Things I say about acknowledging country is that when we acknowledge country, it's about our hearts and minds coming together through a genuine want and act of building relationship. And so when you acknowledge country, you need to acknowledge the country that you're on, and remembering what I said about country, that it's all lands, waters, sky, trees, plants, animals, birds, fish, rocks, mountains, and all peoples. What's actually inherent in those words is that there's interconnected relationships between all of those things. That might be plant and fish, like in the Sydney area, when the wattle blooms, it's the time for the eel or the mullet fish. It's also then related to people, it's the time to go and fish for the eel or the mullet. And so there's all this interconnectedness of relationship happening, and we all have relationship to each other. But also, when you acknowledge country, so for me it's about paying respects, and that respects is deep thank you. So you make it personal. And so even, we have, as Ruth talked about, the discomfort of all of these flights that we've been on, and I feel that very much too. But as the planes come into land, I acknowledge country. The airlines now do it. They do a terrible job, I think, because they won't name the name of the country you're landing on, but I always do. And when we're on Wudjimmup, most people know it as Rottnest Island on Noongar country, and we're with Uncle Neville Collard, a Noongar elder, and when you're on Wudjimmup, you pick up the sand and you throw it into the wind. And so also to weave in what you've learnt from Aboriginal peoples and your actual relationships. That's really important. If we just say these two sentences, people aren't listening. And now, post-referendum, I found it very emotional to acknowledge country. The first one I did after the referendum, and I got up there and said, I'm a Waka Waka woman, the place of the Bunya Pines and the native grasslands. The last 2022, the Reconciliation Barometer, the Reconciliation Australia release every year, said it was only 18% of Australians that know an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person. And so if you don't know us as peoples, then how can you know country and understand it? So we have to start somewhere, and by acknowledging country, I now, it always has been, but I very clearly articulate it as a truth-telling, it's a justice action, and it's about building relationship and acknowledging country. So find your own words. You need to acknowledge the country that you're on. Go and learn about this country. If you don't know why this was Gadigal country, go and find out where all the grass trees were. And every time you see a grass tree, remember that story and pay your respects to the elders. When you walk along King Street in Newtown, that was the trading route of the Gadigal people. I only lived in Sydney for 3 years from 2019 till last year. But any place I go, I learn the story. And it's been beautiful travelling with Ruth across these lands now called Australia to learn the story of I haven't added up how many country we've been walking on, but to learn the stories, and that the elders are part of that story and all the parts of country. And so the other question, how was it when I went through high school, and what was I taught about Indigenous culture and history? So I finished year 12 in 1997, and I remember the only thing was really in grade 5, and there was this tree with this bark lean-to, and I was told that the class was told that's how Aboriginal people, how my people lived in their houses. And I had to colour in a man playing a didgeridoo in grade 5. That's all that we got. I did modern history in high school and learnt the great about the American Civil Rights Movement, and heard Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, and in my class tried to say, this is like what happens to my people, to Aboriginal people, and the class and the teacher not understanding. Today I was teaching a year 3 class at a school here in Sydney, And their unit of inquiry is about how we organise ourselves. So they have this big question and they spend a term looking at it. And they've looked at wants and needs, and they were talking about, well, how can we think, if they were designing a house or a city, how do they think about the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples? And that's a great question, because we're often not thought about in society today. But I actually took them back pre-colonisation and how Aboriginal society was structured. We had everything we needed, not just to survive, but to thrive. And the first thing they drew was the big river, and the rivers are the borders of our nations. And they're full of the fish and the eel, and so they drew these, and I showed them our houses, that we did build houses, and we did sew clothes, and the bush tucker, they drew their little bush tomatoes and native raspberries, and their places of ceremony, of spiritual significance. They drew their classrooms, which is where we see all our rock engravings and rock art. So we've come a long way, but this school is unique. I work in other schools where they're not even ready to start the journey. And so it's not just our education system that's going to change things. When you walk on the concrete and bitumen, that tells you the truth-telling about stolen land in this country. And so it's beneath your feet and all around you every day. And I just want to honour in my life, she's passed away now, Auntie Faye Gundy. So I was very special at school in Queensland. She was the first Aboriginal educator in Queensland, and she was placed at my high school. And she took us over to Quandamooka country, to Minjirrabal. Most people would know it as Stradbroke Island. And we saw the big middens. And even today I was talking to a Year 8 history class about what a midden is. You know, that was us living sustainably. They were our rubbish bins. But told you about family and culture and ceremony and diet. But sadly, so many things have been destroyed of our culture, but we're left with the rubbish bins. So, you know, that's what I leave you with today. We need to protect other things. We can't be blowing up 46,000-year-old sacred sites. And it wasn't just through at National Reconciliation Week a couple of years ago. That's been going a long time. You know, we stand in this church. Is this church on the Heritage Register, Reverend Joe? Yes. And so, but our cultural sites are not protected. And sadly, since with the Voice referendum, many of them are being vandalised. And so, if we are truly part of Australia, that's your history as well as our history. And those aren't just our sacred sites. That's God's creation that's being destroyed, and it's happening each and every day in Australia. And so, yeah, I thank Auntie Faye Gundy for making me strong in my culture and the other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students we had. But it was hard, and I remember in grade 6, the teacher did this exercise where you had to go back through your generations to when did your family come to Australia, and we had this cultural diversity pie graph. So if you had English or Scottish or Irish heritage, there weren't that many other cultures represented in my classroom in Queensland. But I wrote down Australia for being Aboriginal, and the teacher said, no, that's not the exercise, Brooke, it's not Australia, it's where your family came from. And I said, my family have always been here. And she's like, they haven't always been here, you had to come from somewhere else. And I said, no, I'm Aboriginal. And this is me as a 12-year-old child in Queensland. And still it was a denial. She was a very good teacher, but in that moment it was very hard. And anyway, Mum and I went up to the principal the next day, and my little bit went into the pie chart of my Aboriginal heritage. But sadly, you know, we're still fighting that today, and our kids are up against that, our Aboriginal kids in the schools today. I thought by the time we got to 2023, people wouldn't be saying, you don't look Aboriginal, you can't be Aboriginal, you must be 1% or 1/200th. These things hurt, and I thought that would change today, but it's not, and that's up to all of you to help that to change, to give us our human dignity as human beings, to learn the stories. If you don't know why my skin colour is the colour it is, you don't know the true history of this family and the decisions my matriarchs had to make so that I could be here today. And so It's not all in the education system that the change is going to happen. It's events like these, and you're the ones that have to invite and bring your friends and your family and your work colleagues. We've got to gather together in intergenerational spaces. That's what we can learn from Aboriginal peoples as well. And so that's up to all of us.
You've actually answered one of the questions here, which I will now direct to each one of you. Just very briefly.